Welcome back. My name is Katie, and today we're going to talk all about weeds. Last year I had the worst weed problem that I've ever had in my 15 years of gardening with this new garden space. So if you're new here, this is a new garden because we just moved last year. So we tilled it up, put everything in, and oh my gosh, the weeds were absolutely horrid. And so I did a few things out of desperation to control the weeds, which worked, but it's not something that I want to be doing year after year. So this is my year to tackle the weeds, and in a smart way that I think is really going to pay off. And I know weeds are something that all gardeners deal with. You're probably dealing with them. So I think this is going to be a really helpful episode to see what my game plan is. It's something new, so I'm experimenting a little bit, but I have a good feeling it's going to work. So first, let's talk about these planting rows. So if we've done a good job creating nice, rich soil for our vegetable plants, naturally, the weeds are really going to thrive as well. And that's just the nature of the beast. Nature loves to cover the soil. Bare soil is something that you basically never see existing in nature. And so we need to kind of play with nature's rules and make it work in our favor. And that is where mulch comes in. I love to use organic straw. It is my absolute favorite one to use. I started with it last year for the first time. Mulching is pretty new for me, and I've noticed some amazing things. So first of all is the weed suppression. So these plants were put in I think May 1st is when I planted them. So it's been about a month and I've done zero weeding, absolutely none. And as we look underneath, you're gonna see that there are no weeds under there. So this has just created a great barrier. It also provides some insulation for those chilly days. But as we move over to this cluster that I did not get around to mulching, you can see that there are lots of weeds under here. Here's a bunch more over here. The weed suppression is amazing, but there are two other major things that I've noticed since using the organic straw. One is I'm watering way less, so it's keeping the moisture in the soil around the plants where I want it instead of it evaporating up to the sky. The other thing is so many more worms. I noticed as soon as I put the organic straw in, I was noticing much more worm activity. So big win for the organic straw. And I keep stressing organic because that part is really important. Straw can often be sprayed with herbicides, and I've heard of so many horror stories of people just picking up a random bale of straw from the gardening center or wherever from a random farm, and they fried their plants. So stick it out, find an organic farm, and the best place that I've found to find straw bales, organic straw bales, is just Facebook Marketplace. You might have to drive a little bit, but grab a handful of bales and hopefully you don't have to go back throughout the season. So I want to dispel a myth that straw is going to drop all sorts of weed seeds and it's just going to create more problems than it would without it, and that's simply not true. You can see some of this has sprouted a little bit, but the good news is if you mulch thickly, those weed seeds are just going to be kind of sitting in the straw, and if I put my hand underneath the straw, I'm kind of snaking underneath and just pull up, they're gone. So it's like a 5-second fix. Much better than digging up weeds deep in the soil. And you may be wondering why I haven't done it on my onions yet, so I'm just about ready to do it. The reason why I haven't yet is my onions about a month ago were itty bitty, and I just felt like putting the straw in would kind of push them around and bully them a little bit too much. And so you can see that I do have some weeds started, but now is the time. I think they're strong enough, big enough, where I can get in there and start laying some straw. Same thing with the potatoes. If you missed my potato planting video, definitely go back and check it out. But I'm gonna do something new with my potatoes this year. Typically I hill them, where you pile soil up on them to get the tubers deeper down in the earth to keep them cool. But now that I have my wood chips kind of in the way, which I'll talk about in a minute, I'm gonna do deep mulching with straw. So now that these guys are up, I'm gonna start piling some straw, and I'm gonna keep piling it up probably at least maybe 8 inches as the plant grows, and then that's going to create a really great alternative hilling method and keep the weeds down. Here are my 2 beds that I've done absolutely nothing to, 1 as an experiment and 2 because I just haven't gotten around to weeding it. These ones I have been weeding, and same with the other bare soil ones I have been going through and weeding. So I have these ones left, but you can see how quickly those weeds can absolutely take over if you don't do anything about it. I believe these are where my tomatoes and peppers are going, and I have a couple strategies. One that I debated is I could have gone ahead and threw some mulch down early in the spring just to suppress the weeds from the get-go, and that is so tempting. It would absolutely work. But the problem here in Minnesota, where it is so cold and we have such a short growing season, is by mulching it, I'm gonna cool the soil temp down. And my soil temp is still like 50, 55 degrees. I'm still waiting for that soil temp to come up so that I can even plant. And if I were to mulch, I would just delay that, and then I might not even get a harvest at all. So we are racing against time here in Minnesota, so I need that dark soil to absorb the sun's rays and get that soil temp up. Now with that, another option is I could lay black plastic or landscape fabric, which is dark and would help suppress the weeds, but I'm just not a big fan of using plastic in my garden. So for me personally, I just do it a little old school. I'm just gonna keep these weeded until my plants are planted, and then I will mulch. And yes, adding that organic straw is going to modulate the temperature a little bit, so they may not get as hot of soil as they'd like if I were to leave it bare, but I still had a fantastic harvest last year. So I think that is the sweet spot. Leaving it open for a while till you plant, then mulch and let them thrive. And if you find yourself needing to do some weeding by hand, this is my absolute favorite tool. This is called a hula hoe. I love it because I can do it standing. I don't have to be crawling around on my hands and knees. And it's also more gentle on the soil. It's not a tilling motion. It's just going to be cutting down right underneath at the plant's roots and just chopping it off. And you can just leave the weeds right there as long as they haven't gone to seed, and they'll just kind of compost down and add nutrients back to the soil. Now you might be wondering, well, Katie, the organic straw is great when you're transplanting and putting in bigger plants, but how do I do things like when I put down my seed for my corn or my bush beans and that type of a thing? So what I've been doing and what I will be doing again this year is I'll be just laying my seed with bare soil initially. Corn and beans need that higher soil temp to germinate, but once they germinate and I know where they all are, then I'll go by and lay some of that straw alongside it. Next up, let's talk about those walking rows. The walking rows I feel like are the hardest to keep weeded because it's all compacted from you walking on it. So it can be really hard to get those roots out of the ground. Even my hula hoe struggles to kind of get through the walking paths. So this is my year to try something new. Last year I did cardboard, and that's a pretty popular method to use in the garden. It works, but that's not necessarily a method I want to be using year after year because there's glues in there, there's dyes in there, there's potentially forever chemicals. Just not necessarily what I want to be using in my garden long term. Plus, I just don't have much for boxes anymore. Last year I had a ton because we were moving, but this year, it was time to move to something a little bit more permanent. And so I've been doing a lot of research and studying other people's gardens, and it seems like wood chips really are the way to go. And we had a lot of wood chips left over from when we had the logging company here. So I thought I'd give it a try, and I've been so pleased with the results so far. I'll give you a peek. So let's go ahead and dig down. This is the section that I mulched a couple of weeks ago, and you can see there are no weeds down here. Hooray! So let's go ahead and cover it back up. You can see there are a few weeds coming in where there's kind of this connection point between the straw and the wood chips, and that's okay. This is a dandelion, so it's nice and deep. I'll just use a little trowel and go along and pop them out, and that should hopefully be it for weeds for the season. These guys were probably already there and they just popped through. I also feel like the wood chips just give it a really nice, clean, organic feel. And another plus with my heavy clay soil is I'm really going to enjoy walking on these wood chips versus muddy, slick, snotty clay. So I'm just so pleased with this addition. It's taken a lot of time and effort, but I think it's really going to pay off. Not only is it suppressing the weeds really nicely, it's not perfect. There's still some in there a little bit that I'm going to have to hand pull here and there. Once we get past this first flush of weeds, it's going to get a whole lot better because I did weed underneath the wood chips, but there's still some seeds naturally that are there that are germinating and coming up. But now that I have this barrier down, it's gonna be really hard for those weed seeds to get re-implanted in there. So I'm loving that method. And yes, you could lay cardboard underneath the wood chips or some weed barrier, and that would be the ultimate protection, but I just don't really want those materials in my garden. So I'm okay with hand picking a few weeds here and there and just sticking with the wood chips. And they should over time slowly break down and just add some natural organic material to my garden. And I think every spring I'll just top it off to keep it a nice thick layer, because if it does get thin, yeah, weeds are gonna come back. And as far as where to get wood chips, that is a great question, because you don't necessarily want to be getting your landscaping wood chips. Those are often dyed with who knows what, and they could even be sprayed with herbicides to prevent weeds, assuming that you're just putting it in your landscaping. So here around our sensitive plants and our food that we want to be eating, you really want to make sure that they're just raw, real, just natural wood. And so if you don't have a logging company nearby, you can, of course, get a chipper, but I know those are expensive. That's on my wish list. I really hope that we can get one soon, because our supply will run out eventually. Otherwise, I've heard there's a good service called Chip Drop that you can look into, and they can just drop off chips at your house. And you might be wondering, well, can I use straw on the walking paths? Could I do wood chips on the planting areas? And technically you can, but I encourage you to do it the way that I have it set out, because the wood chips are pretty permanent. So let's say you put wood chips around your tomato plants, but then you're gonna seed carrots the next year. You're gonna have to scrape all that off and to get down to the soil level where you can put the seeds down. So not a great option. Where the straw is a little bit more temporary. You can make adjustments year after year with that. And then for the walking paths, I like the wood chips because they are more permanent. So they're going to create a better barrier to those really stubborn weeds down there. And then it's something that I don't have to maintain quite as much. And I really like to use both because I feel like it provides a good visual break, where if this whole thing was wood chips or the whole thing was straw, got a bug in my eye. That would just be kind of boring, right? So weed control item number 3 is around the fencing. And actually I have 4. We're going to talk about natural and organic weed sprays at the very end. But around the fencing is absolutely an issue for most of us. Hopefully you have a fence around your garden so it doesn't get eaten by the critters. But the problem with that is you can't really mow under it. And then the grass or weeds are going to come up. And not only then are they going to go to seed and blow weed seeds into your garden for you to deal with later, but if you have electric poultry netting like what I use in the garden, that can be a big issue, because if growth comes up and the fence is shocking the greens constantly, it can fry your fence. And so last year what we did is every few weeks I would come along and hold up the fence for Ryan, and he would weed whack underneath it, and it worked, but it wasn't great. The big project that I've been slowly working on over the last month, and I think I have a video on it about garden prep, kind of showing step by step me getting into it, but basically I've been going along the perimeter with my garden hoe and just digging up the weeds and then dumping a thick layer of wood chips on top. I didn't want to just do the wood chips on top of the weeds because I knew they would just grow right through. So I took the effort to get all of the weeds out of there, and it is making a huge difference already, not only in, of course, the weed pressure, but my electric fence is working so much better now that it's not shocking anything. Initially, before I started this weed barrier project around the outside, the control unit was displaying single digits, I want to say 9, where now it's up at 14, so it is shocking stronger. It's going to improve the lifespan of the fence, so it was a lot of work, but I think this is going to be an awesome long-term plan. Now let's talk about that weed spray, because I do have a problem. The wood chips are working great inside the garden where there isn't much weed pressure anymore, but on the outside of the fence you can see where the weeds are already creeping in. So as an organic gardener, I'm really careful about any sort of spray that I'm putting in my garden. I pretty much never use any sprays actually, but now I'm faced with likely needing to use some sprays. I could go along and weed all these by hand on the outside, but that one's going to be a little bit bigger of a job. And so I've been doing some research on sprays, and a really popular one is to use just white vinegar and adding salt to it. And it's super effective. You can totally do it, but I'm not a big fan for it around the garden because the vinegar totally breaks down. It's biodegradable, no problem, but the salt does not. The salt can stay in your soil and ultimately end up with salt toxicity. Now, while I would likely just be spraying it on this outside perimeter where it's kind of a buffer zone between my garden, it's enough that I really just don't want to risk it. Once the salt is in your soil, you can't get it out. That sounds like a terrible problem to try to fix. So I've been experimenting with just plain vinegar without the salt to see how that does, I'll show you what happened. So here's some sections that I sprayed. You can see there's some light browning, but we hardly made a dent. So it could maybe over time eventually work if I'm really persistent with it and only doing it on hot, dry days. And it would probably take multiple applications to actually kill the weed versus just kill the foliage above. So I've been doing more research, and it sounds like there are higher concentrations of vinegar. So there's 30% solutions. The white vinegar that you just have for your canning and get the big gallon jugs of is only 5%. So I think I'm gonna order some 30% and give that a go. And now that you have to be a little bit more careful not to overspray your plants. So I'm definitely only gonna be doing that around the perimeter of the garden. I'm not gonna be doing that to spot treat on my walking rows. I'm just gonna do that by hand. And we'll see how that goes. If you have any other ideas of sprays that aren't going to hurt my surrounding plants or my soil, I would love to hear them. Let's start the conversation in the comments, because I'm all about experimenting and trying new things, but I don't want to compromise my garden. So that's it for my weed strategy here in the garden. I have a good feeling it's really going to pay off. It's been a lot of work. I've been out here for a solid month doing all of this work. Of course, not every day and not all day, but it's a process, and the earlier you start it, the better. So really getting those wood chips down in these first few sections has made a big difference on the weeds compared to, you saw the other sections, but it's gonna pay off big time in the future, later this summer. Last year I hardly had to weed. Once I got the straw down and the cardboard, it was awesome. I could just spend my time doing other things and harvesting and preserving. So I think this year's gonna be even better. I can't wait to see how it all turns out. I'll definitely keep you guys updated on the weed spray situation and kind of what I'll be ultimately doing for the perimeter piece. And I would love to hear if you have any other additional ideas. So stay tuned and make sure to subscribe if you aren't already. This is just the beginning of gardening season, and we have a lot of fun stuff around the corner. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll catch you on the next one.